True perfection requires imperfection. And when we chase perfection, we're limiting ourselves. The biggest single tool that has aided my creativity is
James McCrae, author, poet, creativity teacher, and founder of Sunflower Club.
I think to be an artist in any way, shape, or form, it's all about continuously reinventing yourself and shape-shifting. And when something no longer feels resonant, it's okay to move on. It's okay to try something new.
He empowers creators to live with purpose and unlock conscious creativity.
If you're not obsessed with something, you're never going to truly be successful in it.
When you're creating art, there must be a sense of, is it worth it?
The short answer is,
Learn how to tap into your creativity and express yourself confidently and authentically.
What would be your guidance be on what I should do to start my expression on social media?
some people say like, oh, don't worry about your audience, just create. And I think that can be bad advice.
It's almost like we are doing a masterclass on creativity in a way.
If you're just starting on something and you think that you're not talented, I don't think that's what it is. I just think that you need...
As creatives, we can be our biggest critics. The desire for approval and perfection can be daunting. But how do we measure perfection? Who decides what is perfect? We sometimes call great art perfect in hindsight. But the process of making art is never perfect. Art is an act of spontaneity, not overanalysis. Art is messy. Art is experimentation. Art is curiosity looking for trouble and fun. During the moment of creation, it's best not to worry about the result. You're not looking for a final solution. You're going on a journey. You're looking to discover something inside yourself. Never aim for external standards of perfection. The pursuit of perfection will only weigh you down. Instead, aim for discovery. Aim for play. Aim for freedom from the inner critic who says, you must be perfect. There's a direct excerpt from your book. Expand on that.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm a writer and an artist, but I think this advice applies to all facets of life. And I think so often people get caught up in chasing perfection. And our society is kind of engineered for people to pursue perfection. They want to be the best. They want to, go through life without mistakes, and just like, we're super critical of our own mistakes and things that are not perfect. But what I've learned in art and writing is that, what we call perfect, it actually, true perfection requires imperfection. There's something about taking risks and coloring outside the lines and dancing outside of your comfort zone that expands you. And when we chase perfection, we're limiting ourselves. Because perfection is based, first of all, it's based on other people's standards. And it's also based on what's been done in the past. Because you're calling it perfect because you're measuring it against something that's already been done. And for sure, in art, that's not a fulfilling way to approach your work, or even in your life and your career. I think that for me, being an artist means so many things, but it really just means actualizing your highest purpose. And your highest purpose, there's no template for that. It's about your own journey. And every good journey, in my opinion, there's an element of wandering and meandering and discovery. So you don't know what that destination looks like yet. When you sit down to make art, for example, or write something, you don't know what that destination looks like. When I wrote my new book, The Art of You, I didn't know what that final form was going to look like. It was many months of exploration and discovery. I like to say that give yourself room to wander, because wandering leads to wondering, and wondering leads to revelation. So for me, it's about trial and error, experimentation, letting yourself be messy, and in the process, you're finding, a new version of perfection that is true to you.
That's so honest in many ways and so true in many ways. At the same point in time, I feel like the struggle sometimes becomes, like you said, it's standards set by somebody else.
Yeah.
But I've also found people have standards that they set for themselves. Now, it could be
Sure.
informed by the people. I'm not debating that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But how does one come to grips with the idea that they have set a standard for themselves? Let me give you an example,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a lot of times, and I struggle with it. I'm sure people who are listening to it and watching this struggle with this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is sometimes you have a benchmark that you have come up with, probably arbitrarily. Probably there is no real logic to it, but there's a standard in your head. You've said, this is my standard. This is the stake I'm putting in the ground. And when it doesn't meet that standard, it
Mm-hmm.
feels like you're defeating almost, or are defeated all the
Mm-hmm.
times.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know, what is the standard and how do you set it? Like, how do you know, okay, this is the standard, this is how I want to set my standards? And then secondly, how do you come to terms with that you will probably not achieve the standard in the first 100 takes?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, what I want to do, what I'm inspired by is great art. And that could be some great albums that I'm inspired by, or great books, or movies, or poems. I'm inspired when I come across just work that inspires me. So I really I have a standard for my own art, my own creativity, my own productivity, where I want to inspire others. But I don't put too much of a definition on what that final form looks like. So one thing I talk about is the difference between intentions and expectations. So an intention is where you are directing your own consciousness and your own energy, whereas an expectation is you expect it to be look and feel a certain way, and you almost have a preconceived idea in your head. So I think preconceived ideas in many ways are the enemy of creativity, because creativity, it's about discovery. So I feel, and I've seen in my own work, when I just remain open and I remain curious, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to open my portal of intuition to guide me. So I don't even know what that final output could look like yet, because I'm discovering it along the way. So I keep that intention to guide me forward, and I let the final outcome turn out however it's going to turn out. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You can make mistakes, because there's always a next time. Life is full of second chances. You can always make something else. And with every iteration, you get a little bit better. You learn something new. You find a style that's uniquely yours. So if you really want to be self-actualized in any practice, in any, field, it's about bringing your own self-actualized purpose into reality. And for me, that is an art form, is making the unreal real and manifesting that within yourself. And there's no template on what that could look like, because it's going to be different for everyone.
Is there a way that you've found yourself or your students, because you coach as well, or your clients that you coach, where you're able to help them surrender to that experience?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to what I call in terms of creativity, what I call the yin and the yang of creativity. So I think our first impulse, and if you look at the society around us today, it's very productivity oriented, where everything's focused on the end result and how much work you're getting done, how productive you're being. But I think it's so important to take a step back and tune into your own inner stillness, which is how you connect with your intuition. So I do my best to be guided by, you could call it your higher self, you could call it your intuition. Some people refer to it as a higher power or a God or whatever it is. There are a million names for it. Sometimes I just call it the muse, right? And I try to make my life and my work in service to the muse. So it's about getting out of the way of your own ego. I think the ego and the intuition can often be in conflict. The ego is what's known. The ego is your, your conscious mind. But I think when you can let go of the tight grasp that your ego can have and tune into the wisdom of stillness, where you can, it's not about thinking, it's about listening. And for me, when I let myself be guided by my intuition, the end result's always going to be better. So it's about balancing ego with intuition and letting myself be in service to my purpose, my higher purpose, rather than thinking that I have all the answers.
But do you have any technique? Do you have any tool that would help somebody that's listening or watching this on how to like kind of surrender to that experience? And let me share my struggle with you. And I think I'm fairly creative. I don't know if I fit a standard of creativity or not, but I've built businesses and I express my creativity through channels like, this, or channels like creating something, which is a business or an organization, or I coach people. Those are all creative expressions for me. But I often find that I have to contain it into a calendar for me to be creative. It's almost like I have to schedule my creativity. And I've heard that from some writers as well, is that they schedule their creativity and that's how they turn on their intuition. And that seems to be what works for me as well, is basically because I am scheduled for example, even this podcast, right? I have to think about all of my podcast or ways of doing the podcast. Like, okay, I want to open with an actual quote from the book, which actually means I have to read the book, right? To go, okay, this is what's speaking to me. That's what challenge I think we are going to solve by the end of it, and so on and so forth, which requires me to put myself on a schedule of saying I have to read. So today I'll be doing 3 different podcasts, which means I have to read 3 books before a set date in a scope of sometimes a week. Right. And that's perfectly okay with me, but it's scheduled creativity, almost like I am telling my intuition, please show up because I have a deadline to meet. So that's my technique. And I'm not saying it is true creativity or not. It works for me. Is that even a valid thing to say? And secondly, are there tools like that you've discovered, hey, Ajit, I do this, and that actually helps me get really in tune with my creativity?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, there's a time to do and to be productive and to work and to be committed and to be dedicated. And there's a time to sit back and honestly to do nothing. And it's really about knowing when to tap into both. So for me, the biggest single tool that has aided my creativity is meditation. And I start off every morning with meditation. And these days I just meditate for like 10 or 15 minutes. But when I was learning meditation, I used to meditate for 1 hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours when I was in meditation training. So meditation is one form of what I call cultivating intuition or consciousness. Breath work is another. There were different tools to make yourself open to receiving. And I do schedule my creativity, and I think it's important to do so because I think that what I like to say is the muse is attracted to dedication, right? So the muse doesn't just it can just hit you in the middle of nowhere when you're in line at the grocery store or whatever. But for me, it's about making my creative practice similar to a spiritual practice. Okay, so I show up every morning to create. Every morning I have 3 hours blocked off to be in that creative flow. So that's something that's for me pretty much non-negotiable. I show up every morning. I have my meditation, then I've got my tea, I've got my instrumental music playing, and I really open my notebook. And this, I'm a writer, so this works for me, but it can probably be applied to other forms of creativity as well. And I really try to make myself a vessel to see what's trying to come through me. So I don't think with my head, I feel with my body, and I feel what is trying to come through me. What is the muse trying to say through me? And I don't measure myself by output. So like some people have a word count they want to get to every day. I have to write 1,000 words every day minimum, and that's my word count. That can work. I don't do that. I let myself be guided. So some days might be super productive, or I let a lot of things come out, and they're great ideas, and I have like 5 pieces of content to share or whatever. Some days it's just not there. So I don't beat myself up for not producing, because at least I showed up. So I show up, but when I'm showing up, I'm giving myself a lot of room to flow. So it's kind of a mix of being dedicated and diligent, but also open to receive. And I don't pressure, the outcome. So for me, it's truly about cultivating your consciousness so you're not always thinking, but you're listening. And meditation has been the most helpful for me in doing that.
Beautiful. Is there a particular flow to this meditation? I know you started with like 3-hour meditations to now 20 minutes, but is there like a general frame that you go, well, this is kind of what you want to think about as or if you're willing to share exact practice, that works too, but if even just general terms works.
Well, so I do 2 things. One is meditation, and the other is more just meditative. Okay? So my meditation is super simple, super classic. I sit there in an upright position, close my eyes, and take deep breaths and focus on each inhale and exhale. And that's really it. When just like if thoughts come into your mind, just kind of ignore them. I call it like listening to the space between your thoughts. Mm-hmm. The mind's always got thoughts, but can you just loosen the rigid lines of your conscious mind, and just try to focus on that empty space between your thoughts, where it's more spacious. I think that's how you cut through. The thoughts are like the clouds in the sky, but when we can focus on that empty space between our thoughts, we're cutting through beyond the range of our conscious mind. Because I think the best ideas do not come from the conscious mind; they come from beyond. And intuition is the portal that connects us to those thoughts or those insights. So again, about like 10 minutes of just like classic meditation. But when I'm writing and I'm creating, I'm still in a meditative space. So like one thing you can do, for example, is I call it asking the universe a question. So like you might pose a question to the universe, like, what is the best way for me to do X, Y, or Z? Like, if you could be working on a program, writing something, you might feel a block somewhere. Like, how am I supposed to get, what's the solution here? You simply pose the question to the universe, and you just sit in stillness and wait for a response. And don't rely on your, we always want to figure things out, like solve it. But it's not about solving, it's about receiving. So pose a question to the universe and sit in stillness and wait for an answer and see what comes through. And, more often than not, that leads me to a better solution than I would have if I was trying to mastermind it on my own devices.
Wonderful, wonderful. So what I'm hearing is that set up, yes, you want a container so you can listen.
Yes.
It's mostly a container to be able to listen.
Right.
And you set it up the way you can. I mean, not everybody will have the availability of being able to sit with that meditative state for 3 hours. I'm not sure how our listeners would be right now, but create a space. I think that's the key message here. Yep. Create space so you can listen to when your intuition is willing to talk.
Yes.
And then set yourself up with some kind of practice. One of them could be a meditative practice where you're listening between the spaces, so you're tuned in and turned on.
Yes.
And then just listen and download whatever comes through.
Absolutely. And I would add, because you said, you've got to create that space and that in more ways than one. Because I believe in, like, again, my creative practice is similar to a spiritual practice. So I believe in setting the environment, right? So having I call it like making an environment that is attractive to the muse, right? So, lighting some Palo Santo, playing some nice music, keeping your room clean, keeping your space where you create clean. I think there's a correlation between, the cleanliness of mind and cleanliness of space. So I really try to, almost make it a sanctuary. And I even treat my office like, I call it like an artist altar. So I surround myself with artifacts of my favorite creators. This could be like first editions of some of my favorite books, or like framed pictures of some of my favorite artists, in the same way that someone in a spiritual tradition might have their gurus or their gods or whatever on display. I do the same thing, but with my own artistic influences. So it's about also cultivating that environment. So you're really creating a sanctuary where the muse feels attracted to visit.
Beautiful, beautiful. So what I do is sometimes as I'm reading somebody's book, like I read yours, something comes to me, and so I write it, and then I would love to have your comment and thought on this. This is what I wrote. We're all artists, but will we create art? There's only one way to know. Answer, if you're interested or obsessed. When you are interested in something creatively, you will look at art. When you're obsessed with something creatively, you will create art. It's not your talent that makes art, it's your work ethic. Your thoughts?
That's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I think that I like the idea of obsession, because I think we're all, some people might, not know exactly what they should be doing or want to be doing. And I think for me, that was the case, is following what I was obsessed by, and for me, that was just making art and just finding what you cannot ignore, listening to that inner calling and letting it guide you. And even if you don't know where it's going to lead you, because I feel like if you're not obsessed with something, you're never going to truly be successful in it. So I think it's so important to align your passions with your actions, and to really, really love your life by dedicating yourself to what you're obsessed by. And then you mentioned work ethic is like, yeah, showing up, continue to show up, be dedicated, give your life to what you love. When I spend so much time, that's why 3 hours a day, just in that meditative space, listening to the muse, that could sound like a waste of time to so many people. But for me, it's like, I'm here to make art. I'm here to write. And the more time I can just pour myself into that, the better. So finding what you love, number one, and then giving yourself to it completely.
Beautiful. And I think it's also anything that we really remember are things that we were kind of obsessed with. If you really think about it, like your first love, your first kiss, your first time on stage, your first poem, all of these were acts of obsession in a way, where you suddenly went, wow, that, like you really put some effort into it. And that's why I think even if you feel less creative, or you feel like, oh, I'm not really an artist, it's probably because you haven't really obsessed about anything in a long while. Yeah. You haven't really gone, no, I'm going to really figure this thing out. Yeah. I don't know anything about it, or I know something about it, but I'm going to really try to figure it out. Which also reminds me of your story that you talk about, your life story, basically how you got here, and how I think it was a little bit crazy, in lack of a better term, right? You had a successful advertising career in New York. Yeah. And then you went through a whole experience and a whole journey, which I'd like you to elaborate on, as you found this yourself now in Austin.
Yes.
And being drawn to this place.
Yes. Well, yeah. So my background is in advertising. I spent 10 years working as an advertising professional. First, before that, I was an artist. Growing up, I was an artist. I was a poet, and I didn't have any professional ambitions. And I found myself going to art school because that's the only thing that I could do, because that's the only thing that I was obsessed with. And learning graphic design in art school, it got my foot in the door in the advertising industry. I like to say that I snuck in the advertising industry through the back door, as an artist. And then suddenly I'm a graphic designer. And then once I'm in, then I can look around and navigate and start to use my career as my own canvas. Because I realized I no longer had a passion for graphic design. I think for me, it was a matter of what I used to find fun. Now there's all this pressure for it, and I'm doing it in such a professional way and the clients are dictating so much of it, that I lost passion. But I'm like, what else can I do now that I'm here working in advertising? So I pivoted to being a brand strategist. And that was more exciting because suddenly I'm more upstream of some of the ideation. I can think of concepts and marketing plans and and campaigns, and I was like naming companies and doing brand messaging. So a lot more of a broad creativity. And that was really fun for a number of years. And I was living in New York City, working on Madison Avenue, doing brand strategy. And I've always, I think to be an artist in any way, shape, or form, it's all about continuously reinventing yourself and shape shifting. And when something is no longer feels resonant, it's okay to move on. It's okay to try something new. So at a certain point, brand strategy just didn't do it for me anymore. And I was feeling like my creativity was being stifled, and I was being productive, but I wasn't inspired, and I wasn't proud of the work I was doing. And I felt like my career was at a dead end. And there was a moment of surrender that I had to go through where I surrendered to the moment, and I didn't, I felt like completely stuck, and I had no choice but to let go. And it was in that surrender that I started writing poetry again. And for the first time in many years, I was writing poetry again. And I just felt that the floodgates of my own creative spirit expressing itself again in a way that was so fulfilling. And shortly after that, I started to make memes, and many people now know me from my memes on Instagram. And that was a new form of creative expression. And I really was like, okay, how can I apply poetry to memes and make things that are memes, but there's like a deeper philosophical meaning to it? And that became a new canvas for creative expression. And then, speaking of listening to the muse, how I landed here in Austin was completely accidental. And it's about trusting what comes through. I was living in LA with my now wife. We were going to renew our lease. And out of nowhere, I just said, or we could move to Austin. And I swear to God, that was not premeditated. That just popped into my head. I had never been to Austin. I didn't know anyone in Austin. I just said that. And then she surprisingly liked the idea. And a couple months later, we're living in Austin. I did not know how great of a community that I would find here. And I didn't know that I would be finding my people and my tribe and so many great, conscious, creative people here in Austin. And it wasn't premeditated. It wasn't conscious. It was an idea that just popped into my head. And it's opened so many doors for me as a coach, as a space holder. And it's a new form of creativity for me to be a teacher or to host events. And this is a whole new stage. I'm very comfortable as a writer behind the page, working in solitude. But now it's like a new phase of my creativity is hosting events, teaching others, and to show up in a way that is the new edge for me. And that's what I'm doing now.
So many, by the way, Austin for us was pretty similar for me and Nita, we were in LA.
Yeah.
We never, at least I never really loved LA. We just moved there because we had to pick a city in the US because we wanted to have kids, and Nita's American and she felt like I would like my kids to be from this country or at least have the passport. So like, fine, let's move to the US. And the first city we thought of was LA. We literally leased out an apartment that we never visited. We were like, all right, let's just move. Because before that, we were nomadic for about a year and a half, because that's what we actually wanted to do at the time before we decided we want kids. And once we decided we wanted kids, we were like, that's not a good life with a child, in our opinion, or at least at that time and even today. And then during COVID, like somebody said something about Austin. We knew like one person in Austin. And I texted that person. He was like, come, go check out the places. I'll hook you up with an agent, which was a different friend who said, I'll hook you up with an agent, find some places. And he got me just meet a bunch of people one of the evenings. He was like, you're staying, come over, I'll get you to meet the community here. And we just fell in love with the quality of individuals and the quality of connections that you create here. Yeah. And so we moved to Austin. So a funny coincidence that most people who moved to Austin didn't really expect to move to Austin or didn't really expect to love Austin. And then they came and they're like, wow, I love this. Yeah. And mostly it's the people. I mean, because the city sometimes can get to you, especially when it gets real hot.
That's true.
But anyways, some things that was so interesting that you're mentioning, and I find them interesting because I feel maybe they're more natural to you, but they're very difficult for people. And so I would love to hear your thought or the thinking process for it. Is when you're creating art, when you're creating new moves like you are doing right now, there must be a sense of, I'm growing in this edge or in this edge area that I'm growing in. Is it worth it? Like, is it really worth for me to pursue this rather difficult endeavor instead of just doing what I do and I can do comfortably? How do you challenge that, pursue that, question that, wonder about that?
Well, the short answer is it is always worth it. If I had I've had to take so many leaps of faith without a safety net my entire life. I grew up in a very small town in Minnesota where there weren't a lot of artists, and most people never even left that town. But I knew I didn't want to be there. I knew it didn't feel right with me. So I knew I needed to make some big changes and to take some leaps of faith and to really, begin a journey to find myself and to find my people and to find what I was meant to be doing. I had no choice but to, find that edge and to follow it and to continue following it through the different phases that it took. And it wasn't easy. There were always so many roadblocks. Whenever you venture into any new territory, you're suddenly a beginner again. We become we learn skills. Like for me, a graphic designer, right? I was professionally trained to do this one thing, and I did it well. But then I didn't want to do it anymore. The easy thing would have been for me to stick with what I already knew. But I knew, listen, 5 years are going to pass in the blink of an eye. And we know this, time passes quickly. And if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to be in the same place. And if you're not happy with what you're doing in the moment, you're going to be so much more unfulfilled if you keep doing it in 5 years. So it's so important to change course and to allow yourself to be expanded. And there's so much wisdom that you pick up on that journey. And it's so good to be a beginner at something. In the book I talk about beginner's mind. It's a concept in Zen Buddhism, where it's like in the expert's mind, there are very few possibilities because they already know X, Y, and Z. So their mind is sort of closed. But a beginner, your mind is always open. You're always curious. You always are, looking around to see what you can learn, and I think when it's great to be an expert, but then we get complacent and then we stop growing and then we become stagnant. So even if you are an expert, how can you approach your work like a beginner? And, having the courage to change courses and jump into something completely new that you don't know anything about, and let yourself find a new way, find a new version of yourself, pull from a new place. And with every stage that you do that, you're going to become more self-actualized, more aligned with your purpose, and more of a well-rounded, complete and fulfilled human.
Wonderful. And while I totally understand that it's always worth it, can you expand a little bit more on that idea? Because sometimes you are unfulfilled with something in the moment, and there are many factors that play into it. Like, for example, maybe you're not getting the success that you wanted. Maybe you're not hitting the milestone that you really want to. But sometimes sticking with it for a little bit longer than one expects, you finally turn the leaf. You finally turn that corner where you go, oh, I finally found why I love this. Is there, the answer could be, whatever. The point really I'm trying to say is there a real way to kind of go, hold on to this kind of a frame of thinking for me to really recognize what's worth and not? And I want to increase the stakes a little bit, and they're probably not as big for me, but because now I've been in the experience for a hot minute, but I know it's really big for a lot of people. So only, I think, and I could be wrong, but I think it's only 0.5% of all users of, say, a platform like Instagram would ever be creators. Or 1%, something ridiculous. We think there are a lot of creators. They're not. There's a lot more users of Instagram than actual creators on Instagram. And same for any other platform. Same for TikTok. The percentages might vary, but it's something 1%. If I'm really pushing my luck here, 2%.
Wow.
Right? And the reason why I highlight that is because that informs us a little bit on how fearful it is to create and to break the mold.
Yes.
And that's where I'm really coming from, is let's say somebody starts that creation. How do they know it'll be worth it? Because it's scary as hell. It's scary as hell to put ourselves out there, an unfinished work or work that you don't know if it's finished or not. How do you know? How do you frame, or what's the story? Maybe that's the better way to ask this question. What's the story do I need to tell myself or operate from that gives me the permission to show up a little less fearful?
Yes. So what's coming to mind for me is whatever you do in life, in work, in art, it's so important that it's fun. It's so important that it's fun. If it's not fun, if it's not fun, maybe you shouldn't be doing it. It goes back to the obsession question. What do you find exciting? And it's even like, you're right. You might not have to change your career. Like you might just need to find new inspiration in your career. Like, for example, going back to beginner's mind, you don't have to leave your career and find a new one to find beginner's mind. You can change your mindset to be open-minded and curious and make it interesting again, make it fun again, without having to quit your job. And because what some people do is they're always unsatisfied, so they're always quitting their jobs and they're going to the next one and they're finding the same problems and they're continuously in this cycle,
or their relationships
or relationships. Absolutely. So it's not about necessarily jumping ship when things get uncomfortable, but it's about how can I apply, I would say the two most important words that are coming through are playfulness and purpose. So whatever you're doing, apply playfulness and purpose. So if you're creating for social media, do you have playfulness and do you have purpose? I try to be very clear with my intention for social media, because social media it's a big conversation that everyone's having in the world, and it's a lot of chatter and a lot of noise and a lot of distractions and a lot of toxic opinions. Everyone's rushing to have an opinion on every topic. And I really try to step back and say, what is my voice in this conversation? What am I uniquely qualified to add and say that's going to be helpful, instead of flinging more fuel into the dumpster fire? So I show up with purpose and intention, but also playfulness. I think that, I work with a lot of creators who want to be, content creators, influencers, people who can build a platform and a following on social media. And I tell them all, you have to find what makes you the most excited. If it's not fun, you're not going to stick with it. So like everyone's got a different voice. So what is the most exciting for you? So like for me, when I first started, like when my first book came out and I was, suddenly using social media to promote myself and to get my voice out there as a creator and as a, just a public persona, I remembered, because I didn't want to do video. Like I felt pressure at the time. It was people like Gabrielle Bernstein and these other like self-help type authors, and they were all had these, bubbly cheerleader type approaches, and they were very good public speakers, and like that just wasn't me, and I couldn't fake it, But But I'm like, what's fun for me? What's the most exciting thing that I can bring to this conversation? And I remembered as a kid how much I loved to draw, and how much I love to like just to doodle. And just, I'm not a great drawer, but I like to doodle and, do some simple drawings. So my first Instagram posts were doodles, and I would they were basically just like stick figures, and like there would be some captions, and I would like share insights and inspiration and wisdom through these little doodles. So that was something that I found fun. I wasn't forcing my creativity to look like someone else's. I was like, no, this is what I'm going to find the most fun. And if it doesn't matter if no one else is doing it. If you just try to copy someone else, it's not going to, number one, you're not going to have fun doing it. And number two, the audience is not going to feel that enthusiasm from you. So find what you love to do and show up with purpose and playfulness, and you're set.
Beautiful. I love that. And I love how you said it's purposefulness as well, and playfulness as well.
Yeah.
And I think one thing to kind of add to that is playfulness looks different for everyone as well.
Absolutely.
It's like how purpose will look different, so is playfulness. For you, it is to doodle. For somebody, it might be doing a video. Somebody might be doing a podcast. Somebody might be doing their own unique thing that I don't even know what to comment on, right? So it's something that is an internal journey to ask yourself, I guess.
Absolutely.
The question of what does playfulness, or what is playful for me? What is it that I will enjoy creating?
100%. Listen, people ask, me, like, how do you go viral on Instagram or whatever? And there are a lot of people that go viral for completely different reasons. Some people are great at making videos and they just do video. They love to talk. They love to be seen. Some people just have their text on a white background. Keep it very simple. Let their writing speak for them. Some people share their lives and their travels and their social, lives, and you get almost like a behind the scenes look at that person's life story. Some people like to make memes. There are so many different ways. There's no one way to go viral. There's no one way to create content. It's so important to find your own authentic voice and to have fun with it, and that's going to look different for everyone.
What I find is, for me, to rediscover what is fun for me, I had to listen to a lot of voices. It's almost as if I had to watch enough people, listen to enough people, read enough things to be able to discover what I'm most called to create.
Yes.
And that's an integration of when I was a kid, when I was in my teens. I used to write a lot of poetry as well. And then I kind of lost it while I was trying to build a career, like just you got into the rut of life, whatever. And then I found that what I actually really enjoy is just writing. Because I used to not only write poetry, I used to write short stories. And I had short stories which are maybe 2,000 words or something like that, 3,000 words, really short stories. And so I realized that that's what I really enjoy. And I like what I'm informed, which is why I said information may be a critical piece of discovering your playfulness, for me at least, was I also enjoy this. Like just sitting and learning, staying curious, kind of going, okay, what does that mean? Like reading somebody, like books have been my juice for the longest. I think that's been one of my biggest, except coaching. I think the second biggest thing that is I read 40 or listen to 40 plus books a year.
Wow.
So I was like, well, that's something that I love doing. And that is so great to be able to sit with somebody like you who has really thought about something, really thought about it. Because to write a book is to really think about something, right? Really, really focused, at least 6 months of writing, right? So that's a lot of writing to be able to sit and kind of pick your brain on it, right? But it was, I rediscover my playfulness through consumption almost, if I may.
Definitely.
What are some of the ways that you have found one can rediscover? Because I'm sure everybody has playfulness, but we get into the life and we go, it needs to make business sense. It needs 1 + 1 = 2. That kind of thing. We get into the math of the world, and that's how you forget playfulness.
Yes.
So how or what is it that you have found useful for such individuals who are in their rational mind?
Yes.
That need to justify what they're about to do next?
I am a big believer in being a student of life, and I like to be a sponge for information, because I think of consciousness as like soil in a garden, and the creative process for me is similar to gardening or farming. There are yin activities and there are yang activities. So the first thing you need to do is cultivate the soil, and it needs sunlight. It needs water. You need to plant the seeds, and then the crops will grow naturally, and the crops are our creative output. With the right conditions, the right inputs, that creativity is going to flow out of you naturally. And then the yang activities are things like, you harvest the crops, you cook them into a meal, you serve them. This is the making of the art and the presentation of the art. But it starts with how you're cultivating the soil. And that includes, what are you consuming on a daily basis? What comes in will come out. So you need to be very conscious about how you're cultivating your soil and make sure you're filling your cup with inspiration. You can watch the news all day, and you can scroll mindlessly on social media all day, and you're not giving your soil the healthy water it needs to flourish. So I'm a big believer in seeking out inspiration, finding inspiration wherever you can. That could look like going to an art museum. It could mean reading books. For me, even though I don't make music, I'm obsessed with listening to music. And I'm always checking for new releases. And I always need new sounds to inspire me. And like a new album will come out, and I'll just play it on repeat for a week. And it just fills me up. Because I want to I feel the vibrations of the music, and I absorb them. And then, in some way, shape, or form, that impacts my writing, because it gives me fresh energy to draw from. So wherever you find inspiration, it could be going to events, going to concerts, seeing public speakers. And I believe in not just sticking within your own field. So for example, I just wrote a book on creativity. I don't read books on creativity. I'm a big fan of Rick Rubin as a music producer, and he just released a great book on creativity. I have not touched it. I have not looked at it, because it's so similar to what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I rather be inspired by the source material, the art itself. So don't just stick to your own field. And if you're a public speaker or a coach, don't just seek inspiration from Tony Robbins or whoever it is. Seek other influences so you can find your own unique blend of what you bring to the table.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I like some of the things that you're saying to stimulate you in a way.
Yeah.
Right. One is reading. One is listening. One, I think you talked about Palo Santo as you create your meditation. This is smells.
Yes.
I think in the book you talk about diet.
Yeah.
There are other elements. So could you, whatever comes to your mind, here are some of the things to consider to stimulate you in the right way. So I know it's all part of the book, and you can always go get the book. Whoever's listening and watching this, The Art of You is the name of the book. And it has, I think, 5 or 6 things, maybe 7 things that you have to keep your, just because I don't remember the exact term, but your container really stimulated towards creativity. What were those?
Yeah, I think it was about the inputs that will affect your intuition, and keeping, tending to the soil in the right way. So yes, consuming art. I'll remember some of them. I won't remember them all. Consuming art and inspiration, being inspired by other artists, other creators. Also, just the people that you spend time with. It's so important to be intentional about your relationships. There's an old adage that it's you are basically going to become the medium of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. Or your net worth is going to be the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with.
Yeah, I think there was a later discovery that it's not only the average, it's actually worse than that. You're going to be
below the mean of that.
Below the mean. Sure. You're most influenced by the least common, not least common, but the lowest denominator of the entire equation.
Exactly.
So if somebody, let's say in your group, somebody has a very poor relationship, you will lean towards really bad relationship. Sure. Because that's the situation, that's the, let's say, worst from the perspective that we're looking
Yeah.
at for that particular thing. So it's actually
Absolutely.
the least common denominator. So it's actually worse than average.
Sure. So cultivating positive relationships with people that inspire you is so important. And that's not always easy, because when you're surrounded by people, it's sometimes hard to cut people out of your life. And like for me, moving around from city to city has been such a blessing, because I still have friends from the places I used to live, but the people that are no longer in residence just kind of fade away, and you find new people that are more aligned with where you are now. So it really helps to move around and to, not get stuck in the same place, for sure. So people, creative inspiration, diet. I'm not a big like diet person, but in terms of just what we consume impacts our consciousness. Like if we eat a lot of, fast food or unhealthy things, that the health of the body is directly impacts the health of our mind and our own creative inspiration. And also, chemicals. Like every chemical impacts us differently. And I don't think there are good or bad chemicals, but they affect us in different ways. So like I love coffee, but I do not have coffee first thing in the morning. I have tea first thing in the morning, because tea keeps me a little bit more open and expansive. Coffee narrows our focus. Coffee is great for productivity. I have coffee later in the day when I'm doing more busy work, because I just need things to stimulate me and power through. It's not the best for opening up your consciousness for or your intuition. It's not bad for it, but it's just not the best. Or even, I'm not a big user of psychedelics at this point in my life, but in the past I have used them, and there is a certain consciousness expanding component to psychedelics. So I think that what I learned from psychedelics in terms of opening and expanding my own consciousness, I bring that into my own creative process. So I don't do them on a regular basis, but I might microdose once in a while, and that just helps, open my mind. Whereas, alcohol is probably not going to help you open your channel. It might help get into flow. If I'm going to write a poem, and if I have some alcohol, it might grease the wheels a little bit to help things flow a little bit easier, but it's not going to expand your consciousness. So different chemicals affect the mind in different ways, and you can tap into them for different purposes.
I guess you check in what works for you as well. Every input has a different response for every person. I know writers who can't write without alcohol. I'm not supportive of alcohol at all. I actually don't drink, and I write without alcohol. I'm a very morning writer when I write, so it's very different for me. But you got to check in for yourself, right? That's like, what is the impact of what you're about to have? I have another quote from your book that I want to read, and I want to take a little detour from our current conversation.
Okay.
And it is, creativity is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. Most people who claim to be uncreative are simply out of shape. They haven't been exercising their creative muscles. But with training and dedication, anyone can become stronger, both physically and creatively.
Yeah.
And I love this quote. And the reason I love this quote is because it brings attention back to, especially if someone thinks, oh, I'm not creative, or I can't really do what James does. It kind of brings that attention back to, you don't have to doubt that. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, I think building creative endurance is so important. Our dedication to what we do, it determines so much in how far we go. And, people might look at my memes or my books now and see, oh, he's just a naturally gifted artist. And maybe in some ways I am, but like I wrote hundreds of poems before the age of 20, like showing up every day and just getting those reps in, getting that practice in. It's about muscle memory, where it becomes natural. If someone is a dancer, first they've got to learn the dance moves. But when you're actually doing the dance, you're not thinking about them ahead of time. You're kind of just letting your body flow because you've kind of memorized the movement. And even your instinct improves the more experience you have. So I think of it like, in the book I compare it to a quarterback in football. What separates a great quarterback from like a rookie quarterback? And when you're playing football and you're a quarterback, you only have a split second to make a decision. You've got people trying to tackle you, people are running around. You've got to make a decision in a matter of seconds. You don't have time to calculate it all. You've got to go by instinct. And instinct, I believe, is the mind's superpower to make hundreds of micro decisions at the same time. Like a quarterback has to make so many like risk reward like calculations subconsciously, instantly. And they can do that because they've been on the field again and again and again. And they've learned, their muscle memory has learned what will happen in different scenarios. So if you just start, like my first poems are not published. You know what I mean? Like it took years of dedication and honing my craft. So if you're just starting on something and you're not, you think that you're not talented, I don't think that's what it is. I just think that you need more data points to draw from, and you get that through experience. So just putting one foot in front of the other and sticking to it, that's the only way to improve at anything. I think one thing I mentioned in the book, so that there's like stages of creative mastery. And this is true for not just creativity, it's for anything. The first stage is unconscious incompetence. So in other words, you don't know what you're doing, and you don't know that you don't know what you're doing. In other words, you're clueless. Mm-hmm. But then you practice a little bit more, and then you reach the next stage, which is competent incompetence. Mm-hmm. In other words, you're still incompetent, but now you know you are, and you see, oh, these are the areas where I'm not so great. These are the areas where I could improve. The next stage is conscious competence. In other words, you've practiced enough, and now you know what you're doing. Now you know what you need to do, and you kind of have the game a little bit figured out. But the final stage is unconscious competence. In other words, it's so natural, it just flows. You don't have to think about it. So the only way to advance through these stages is through practice.
Wonderful. And I love that you also gave the example that you wrote 100 poems, and out of them, most of them probably are not published. Because sometimes those are the reps that people don't consider.
100%.
That one has to do to be able to get to a mm-hmm. place of unconscious competence. Mm-hmm. So as of now, based on the conversation, it's almost like we are doing a masterclass on creativity in a way in this conversation, where I see step one is kind of figure out what do you even want to be good at, or what you're naturally good at or gifted at, or you have discovered it, or you may discover it as to, oh, this is what it is, right? Mm-hmm. There's a model for it. Discover that. Mm-hmm. Once you've discovered it, go and practice. Yeah. Go figure out what needs to be done. And the first bits of it will probably be shitty, and be okay with that. If it becomes unpublished work, it becomes unpublished work. If it becomes published work and is criticized, don't worry about it, because it gets better with time. Mm-hmm. And with more reps, you mm-hmm. get better and better at the skill of whatever that is, yeah. right? And there's, I guess, the final step really is to then be able to continuously do it. So mm-hmm. you can keep getting better at it until you either kind of lose joy for it, then see if you can rediscover it. And if you don't lose joy for it, great, keep doing it. Or change it if you have no way to rediscover that sense of joy, that sense of excitement for the thing that you're doing. Mm-hmm. That kind of roughly feels like where creativity needs to go. Now, I want to utilize this kind of a rough frame that at least I'm able to capture for mm-hmm. in this moment in something that's practical for people. And we touched upon this a little bit for individuals that may be business owners, maybe coaches, maybe new entrepreneurs, maybe people who just want to express some creativity. And social media is one of those platforms where you can easily express it. Easily in the sense of at least it's accessible. Mm-hmm. It may not be easy in the context of creation, but accessible in context of everybody has it, mm-hmm. right? And they can do it on their phone. It's very easy to create technically.
Yeah.
if you were to guide, let's say I was a novice, I was somebody who is a coach or a new entrepreneur, and I have this passion for things, and what would be your guidance be for me if you were to guide me on what I should do to start my expression on social media?
So I would say, obviously it depends on the person, it depends on the field that you're in, but I think it's so important to know why you're doing what you're doing and to add value. Social media, for me, it's not about creativity for the sake of creativity. It's not necessarily like, I think of like making music as like an expression of the soul, or even poetry can be an expression of the soul, where it's just, I'm trying to express myself and just like, I'm just throwing paint at the canvas and like trying to make something beautiful. There's a time and place for that kind of art. But I see social media, especially used by coaches, etc. You're providing a service. I think of it as, they are micro bits of your curriculum. What is your curriculum as a human, whether you're a coach or a teacher or whatever your purpose in life? What is your curriculum? What is the class that you are teaching? And each post is just like a micro lesson in your curriculum. So what is the service you're providing intellectually, emotionally? There's a debate or not about whether you should care about your audience. Some people say like, oh, don't worry about your audience, just create. And I think that can be bad advice, because I think that when you're showing up on social media, for example, you're trying to be of service. So you need to understand what people need. You need to understand the state of the world. You need to understand who you're speaking to and why. What are people, your audience, what are they struggling with? What are you helping them with? And then you show up on a regular basis to provide assistance. So like when I'm doing my content creation, I'm sort of tapping into the collective consciousness and saying like, what is the message that's needed at this time? Mm-hmm. And for me, that's pretty broad, because I'm like more of a writer. So I'm like, if there's a tragedy happening in the world, I need to know that people are feeling sensitive about that. And I don't want to bypass that. I want to address it. I want to give people the emotional support and the inspiration that I feel is needed in any given moment. So I feel like it's very important to be perceptive to the collective or whoever your niche audience is, understand what their problems are, what they're dealing with, and try to be of service. Just be of service. It's not about you, it's about your service. So, whether you're providing humor, inspiration, moments of teaching, you're almost like you're microdosing your curriculum to your audience. So like your course or your program might be, in psychedelic terms, that's the heroic dose. That's the full package, right? You go deep. But social media content is like microdosing. You're just sprinkling a little bit and giving little hits of inspiration. And over the course of time, that can reorient someone's whole life. You might think one piece of social media content is not that important, but if someone follows you for a year and you're posting every day, you're doing a little micro hit on their consciousness every single day for 365 days. And that can have a big impact on someone's life. So just know what your purpose in life is and show up consistently. Find your own unique style. Again, that some people are funny. Some people are teach through humor. Some people make funny reels. Some people just share their words of wisdom. Find your unique style, show up consistently, and be of service.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, James, for coming and making the time to speak with me and speak with our audience and really share your perspective on how we can all be more creative. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, you've written a wonderful book called The Art of You, and I'm guessing there's a place where we can, or a place where you prefer us to get the book from. What would that place be?
Yeah, you can order it online wherever you shop for books. It's called The Art of You. And if you go to my Instagram bio at Words Are Vibrations, you'll find all the store links in there. And you can also subscribe to my email newsletter. in the link in my bio on Instagram.
Cool. Perfect. So the next place to go is go over to Words Are Vibration. We'll link it up in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, James. It was a delight talking to you.
Thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.